There are leaders in the world who are made for impact.
A lot of times, Gretchen, people will move. They'll move up at least to a B player, and then you'll start to see them moving across in that productivity as they get better and better and more comfortable or confident in their job. But if not, if they're resistant to that, there's a plan in place because another option is a performance plan. I always encourage people, don't drag that out. You've got to be able to hire slowly and term quickly if the writing's on the wall. So it's not that we don't want to give people ample opportunity, and they do have opportunity through that kind of A player framework. If it's just not working for them, keeping someone around too long is going to chase your A players right out the door.
I'm Gretchen Schott, and this is Made for Impact, a show for leaders who want to leave a lasting impact on their organizations, their teams, and their lives. There are leaders in the world who are making an impact. My guest today is Dr. Pamela Carrington-Rotto. She's a scaling up and metronomics coach specializing with CEOs and executive leadership teams to help them drive innovation strategies and significantly boost their business growth and their leadership. She has expertise in neuroleadership and neurolinguistic programming, and this helps guide leaders in identifying and overcoming their blind spots. Recently, we had an event at Threefold with our executive leaders, and Dr. Pamela spoke. I loved her tips so much that I asked her to be on the show. You're going to love what she passes on today. Take a listen. Oh, Pamela, I'm so excited that you're here today. Thank you for saying yes to being on the show.
Thank you for the invitation, Gretchen. I'm excited as well.
Tell our listeners a little bit about you, a little bit about your background, where you're from, who you are, all that good stuff.
Well, my background, I'm from Arizona, so I'm a transplanted Hoosier and have been in Indiana long enough to absolutely claim myself as a Hoosier. And in terms of my educational background, I have a master's and doctorate in psychology. So that's a little bit unusual in the sector that I'm in because I'm a coach for executive leaders and business owners or CEOs and their executive teams. And I do that broadly in many different locations, both within Indiana and beyond. And it is just such a great pleasure to be in this space. I had a professor once who said, if you can find that space in life where you want to call what you do plurk, because half the time you're playing and half the time you're working because it's just that much fun, then you really have gotten into a great place in life. And that's how I feel about the coaching that I do and the clients that I am privileged to work with.
I love that, plurk. I also have to say, it's not many a person that would say they're from Arizona and choose to live in Indy. Most people in Indy would say they're snowbirds looking for a home in Arizona during the winter months here. So that's interesting that you have gone the other way, but we're glad to have you. I love Indiana.
Oh, thank you.
All right. So you're obviously a big smarty pants. You have all these incredible experiences. You're super smart, but let's talk a little bit about who has altered your life. So how did you get to where you are today? Like, who is someone that's made a significant impact in your life?
It's been 4 women in my life who have made such an impact. And I was fortunate enough to have some great professors and really amazing mentors through my jobs. And in spite of all of that great mentoring that I've had, it really takes me back to my great-grandmother, my 2 grandmothers, and my mom. My great-grandmother was a very spiritual woman, and I remember visiting her as a young child, and she would have the Bible open, and she would show us her highlighted psalms and things like that.
Love it.
She was such a peaceful, loving woman. That was very inspiring to me, and that inspires the spiritual side. And then my maternal grandmother was a businesswoman. She was an entrepreneur, a founder of a business. It was called Marquez Dress Shop in Yuma, Arizona. And she was incredibly successful as an entrepreneur. And I worked for her over several summers. And so
Nice.
she had a huge influence in the business sector, where my paternal grandmother was in one of the early graduating classes at Stanford when they initially started
Wow.
allowing women to attend. And
Wow.
she was curious and loved learning. And she was non traditional because she loved math. She didn't want to go to teacher school and teach. And she excelled at what she did and continued to learn across her lifetime. And so I credit my lifelong learning to her. And then that takes us to my mom. And my mother always inspired in me, as well as in my sisters and my brother, that we could do anything we wanted to work hard enough to achieve. And that desire wasn't enough. We needed to have the willingness to do the hard things. I grew up with that message and internalized, I think, a lot from all four of those really significant women in my life.
Well, every parent, and especially every mother who is listening to this, is now like dreaming that their own child would say such beautiful things about them. What an incredible legacy of leadership within your family. That is so beautiful. Oh, I just love that so much. I hope my children are listening and that someday they'll say things like that about me to their friends.
Same thing. Maybe mine are too.
So when you think about this incredible like early entrepreneur experience that you had and like the work that you're doing today, is there a thread that you can see from like your professional life to your personal life that you can kind of pull through with that?
There's probably two major threads in all of that. One is personal to me. I was born with strabismus, which is an eye condition. And through multiple surgeries and all of the experiences that I had with that, which I never talked about until I was an adult, it was one of those things that I never wanted to share with people for the longest of times. But through all of that, I think what I came to truly understand is what it feels like to be misunderstood just based on how you show up in
Yeah.
life, and that there's potential within people that is untapped and can be absolutely tapped and cultivated and grown when given opportunity and when doors are opened. So that has really been a thread in my life for helping people access their unique potential beyond even what they imagine that they're able to do. And the other thread that goes along with that was I mentioned my grandmother's dress shop, which my coaching business is named after. Marquet Advisors is after Marquet's dress shop because it was such a huge influence. I decided when I was 12, going on 13, that I wanted to work at my grandmother's dress shop, and she lived 6 hours away from us.
Oh,
So it
goodness.
was
Okay.
it wasn't an easy dream or vision that I had. And so I called my grandmother to ask her, and she told me I would need to call the store during business hours and talk to the store owner, which of course I did. And the store owner invited me to make application. And so in those days, of course, that meant it was mailed to my home and I filled it out and sent it. And then I needed to figure out, because I'm the firstborn of four children, I knew my parents wouldn't be able to necessarily drive me there. I needed to figure out how to get there. So I had this whole presentation. By the time I interviewed for the job, received an offer from my grandmother, who told me that I would call her Mrs. West, no
Yeah.
special favors. I was not her granddaughter at work, but that I was welcome to stay with she and my grandfather, because I was looking at doing this over the summer.
Yeah.
I had an entire presentation for my parents. I'm pretty sure if PowerPoint had been around, it would have been a PowerPoint
I
presentation.
can see that. Yes.
On riding the Greyhound bus, all they had to do was get me to the seediest part of Phoenix, drop me off, and let me jump on a Greyhound bus. And I would ride that to Yuma, Arizona, and work all summer. And
Oh,
so, believe it or not, all of that happened.
yeah.
And I rode a Greyhound bus to my grandparents and worked all summer and then rode home. And I did that across several summers. So how does that play in all of this? My grandmother taught me so many lessons about business and what it is to have integrity in business.
Mhm.
And I one of the lessons is the importance of exceptional customer experience and how to create experiences for people. Because
Mhm.
women would come to the store and they would want to find their very best. And, I was put in a role to help them discover what that was and to see what it did for them when they found something that they felt incredibly good at and had a phenomenal experience, and one that caused them to come back and tell us how that event went or what the next thing was. And so the importance of exceptional customer experience also has really tied in with my desire to help everyone, whether it's individually or in leadership or in business, reach their greatest potential.
Yeah. Oh, I love that. You talk about making the presentation. I think that that is a lost art. I love that you like pitched what you wanted to your folks. I know my son, my older son, last year, he wanted to drive my husband's Tesla to the prom. And we were like, yeah, no, it's not happening. You're like, I'm sure you want to, but no. And, he put together a PowerPoint presentation and he talked about all these benefits, the path that he was going to go and how he was going to do all these things. And we did end up allowing him to take it because he had showed such innovation and do it. We didn't say like, give us a PowerPoint, we'll talk about it. This was like weeks of conversation. And he finally was like, Mom and Dad, I've put together a presentation that I would like to talk with you about this. And I was like, okay, let's see what you got. I like this. So I love that that was part of your experience. And I love that you have these great lessons that you're still applying from, being a young person and working and now being a experienced person and working. It's fantastic. You talked about your blind spots too. And I want to dig into that because you did an event for us a couple weeks ago, which was kind of the impetus for me saying like, hey, you want to be on my show? Because you had so many little great little nuggets. And I promised everyone that day that I was going to have you on the show and have you talk about that decision making model that you
Mm.
taught us. So will you give a little color to that? And that this, like, friends, get a piece of paper, pencil, like write this down because this is brilliant. You're going to love what she has to share here. So walk us through what you told my team.
Okay. I would love to. And if I can, I'll just set the stage a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely.
So this pertains to times when teams are meeting together. And one of the things that we want to be thinking about is inquiry versus advocacy in those situations. So we want to lean into our curiosity and asking questions as opposed to advocating for our own view. By doing that, we then can bring ideas to the table and really discuss and dig through those ideas with curiosity and then make a decision, right? Most discussions need to have some sort of an endpoint for a decision. And so that's where this little nugget comes in. It's a consensus process of decision making. So oftentimes we'll hear people say, oh, we just use majority rule. And we know oftentimes with majority rules, that's all about advocacy and loudest voice typically wins. And so with consensus, it's all about the curiosity of asking questions to get to the best possible answer. And so in order to use the process up front, what is important is to identify whether you're having a discussion or you're going to make a decision. We call that big D, little d. Big D is decision, little d is discussion that will eventually lead to a decision, but not right now. So what we're going to focus on is big D, decision. I don't know, Gretchen, if you've had this experience, but I just flew recently. We had to have some delays in taking off, and then we had to circle the airport a couple of times before we could land. And the experience of that is you kind of wonder, right? When is that plane going to land? And conversations at the decision-making table can have that same kind of approach. It can feel like we're circling and circling. And folks around the table are thinking, we're there. I think we've already made the decision. So by using this consensus approach, it allows you to get to decision more quickly. So imagine, if you will, there's a decision. It's named. We know we want to make that decision today. We've had some conversation. We're asking really good questions and kind of digging into it. And imagine in that conversation, Gretchen, that you think, I think we're there. I think we have a decision. We're just talking around it now. So what you might do is say, let's test consensus. And do we have consensus? There's many ways you could ask that, but basically you're saying, hey, let's test consensus. And then everybody around the table puts up fingers, and it would be 1, 2, 3, or 4 fingers. I've had some clients call this the finger thingy. So if that helps you remember it, that's great. So what I would do as a member of the table, as would you, calling consensus, is I would say, am I all in with this decision? And you would have reframed the question when you asked for consensus. So I'm calling consensus on question XYZ. And if I thought to myself, yeah, I'm there, I am all in, I couldn't be more in on this decision, I would put up 4 fingers. And you would know immediately, hey, she's all in. And maybe you and I both have 4 fingers up. And then somebody else around the table might think, this isn't the greatest thing since sliced bread, but I can certainly align with this. I am perfectly fine with this. I think we have done the job that we set out to do, and this decision is fine. I will align with it. I don't need to talk about it anymore, not around the table, not at the water cooler in the parking lot. I'm fully aligned. They would put a 3 up for 3 fingers. And then perhaps there's somebody else at the table who is still processing the conversation around that decision or question. And they have it's like that one question they haven't asked yet that would help them make the decision.
Yeah.
They would put a 2 up. And 2 commits you to asking a question.
I love that.
And I oftentimes just say, what's the question you haven't asked that if you knew the answer would make all the difference in your decision? And then the last alternative, of course, is a 1. And a 1 is important because it could be that someone who's sitting around the table thinks we have the wrong question, that we're not asking the question that really needs to be asked, or they need to have a one-off with somebody about something related to this before they can fully endorse it.
And would you also say that's a question that I have for maybe one person that I don't need everyone to weigh in on, but I need to get clear with this person, right?
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly. And so it's very acceptable to be a 1, 2, 3, or 4. There's no stigma with any of that because we all want the same thing. We want the best possible decision. And we're all looking at the exact same question. And so based on that, if everyone around the table is 3 and 4, we're finished.
Yeah. I love it.
We're ready to go. Everybody's in alignment, and we know that. And alignment is such a critical part of teamwork. And if somebody is a 2, then, it's almost a relief because you think they're thinking of the question that I didn't think of or that I forgot to ask,
Right.
So then that person will ask the question and we might have a little bit more discussion. And then anybody around the table again can say, are we ready to look at consensus? And just make sure everybody's clear on the question. Fingers go up. Once your 3s and 4s, you're done. If there's a 1, we know that's probably a one-off conversation. Then what we want to do is put a date. When will we come back and make this decision? And at that point, the person or people who are involved with the 1, they're accountable for coming back and just kind of summarizing, we're ready to go. We had a conversation. You don't need to share details, but they're accountable for coming back and just reporting that they're good, ready for consensus. And again, it's done. It saves incredible amounts of time.
I bet. I think this is so brilliant. And I know that when you said this to our group, people were furiously writing it down and oh my gosh. So I think it's wonderful. But when have you seen maybe the the four-finger rule come out too early and cause conflict? Or have you?
I encourage teams to practice the four-finger rule, if you will, the consensus model, before important decisions. So just when it's kind of everyday types of decisions that don't require a lot from people, because learning a system and using a system when you're in intense, potentially emotionally laden conversations or conversations that have some amount of risk or threat to them is not really the time to learn it. So the only time I've really seen that happen is when teams don't use it and then they're in a really sticky situation and they go, oh, let's get out that consensus thing and try that. I recommend that it becomes just a part of, meetings and processes that are used. And that way it's sort of just run of the mill when people do it, and it's less likely to evoke levels of conflict.
I want to stay, because I know you've worked with a lot of CEOs and a lot of executive leadership teams. I want to stay on that thread for a second. And can you share a story about a time when you worked with a team or a group of leaders and they simply just kept getting in their own way? What was the situation and what did you do to try and help them kind of get unblocked in that way?
There are lots of different ways we do that. I think we all get in our own way at different times. So I'm going to think of a situation that was pretty significant, and then I'll contrast that with a less significant
Perfect.
example as well.
That's great.
One of the things that I do in coaching is give pre-work before the sessions, that any kind of coaching sessions. And doing that pre-work is geared toward helping everybody enter the room with, the mindset that they'll need, the knowledge, confidence that they need for whatever is the agenda that day. There was a team that didn't do their pre-work, and it was earlier in my coaching experience. And I thought, that's okay. They're all here. I'm here, they'll just do it anyway. Wow, did I learn from that?
Yeah.
So things were not going well, and they were all getting in each other's ways, and it just was intractable. Now, conflict is a good thing when it's conflict of ideas, right? Because that's going to drive us to better ideas, better solutions, innovation, all those kinds of things.
Yeah. More productivity, all of it.
All of it. When conflict is unproductive, it's the elephant in the room effect, right? And everybody knows it's there, but nobody wants to call it out. And when conflict gets destructive, it gets a personal feel to it. Yeah. And so in this particular situation, I would say it was more than an elephant. There was a herd that ran through the room. And right after that, you could tell that things were about to slide into the personal realm. And so I stopped the meeting and just stepped back, and we just processed what was going on. I literally took the screen down, tore up my agenda, said, this is not where we need to be today. And we processed what was going on. And they came up, it was an executive leadership team, and they came up with the idea that they needed to do what they called get clean with one another. And that they needed to do it outside of our time together. And that then we could reconvene and they would come back in the right headspace with their homework done, ready to go. And it was a great lesson for me about a lot of different things when it comes to coaching and those dynamics. And in the end, I thought, am I sorry that I went ahead without them being prepared? Not in retrospect, because of where they got. It created this opportunity, which is really what coaching is about. It's about asking the questions, the hardest ones, at the right time. And they never had that situation again. And that took off by the next time that they met together. So that's a pretty extreme version. But I think what our audience could extract from that is that those things happen. And sometimes you do just have to pause the agenda. Just call the process and the emotion and what's going on in that space and step back from it And sometimes, yeah, it's about sitting down, grabbing a coffee together, and just doing what this team called getting clean
Yeah, I love
together.
that. Yeah, getting clean. I love that. But I think it's such a good lesson too for managers perhaps that are listening. They go and they have a team meeting and they want their employees to like read something before they come, or they need them to review something before they come into the meeting. And then you're there and it's obvious they haven't. And yet you continue to plug through because this was the time on our calendar that we were going to talk about this, right? Instead of saying like, all right, obviously we didn't do that. So let's talk about why. And it could have been like, I just got busy and my capacity wasn't it. Or it could be like, I didn't really think that this was important to the conversation. So I thought it was busy work. So I didn't do it. Like whatever that might be, but taking that pause. And if there is something going on, I love that getting clean with each other and figuring out then when are we going to get back together? So yeah, that's really great. I love it.
Yeah. I'll tell you, I made so many mistakes in that realm because you're there and you're supposed to be doing whatever the agenda is. I made those mistakes as a leader and as a coach early on. And I really learned that I was denying people the opportunity for accountability, denying them the opportunity to learn. And I was teaching them that it was on me to do all the hard work.
Yes. Yes.
And all they had to do was show up. And we know that leadership and management is nothing about just showing up.
No.
And so I was messaging and teaching exactly what I didn't want to message in my own behavior.
I think that's because you started out teaching, and I did too. And I think that is a skill that people don't always understand. Like people will come to me and ask about, I want to do what you do. And I do teach, but it's the facilitation that's that other piece. And it's being the facilitator that you recognize this is not about me. It's about what you guys need. And so I'm going to show up and be present to serving you and however that might be. Whereas when you're teaching, you're the teacher, you've got a curriculum, you've got an agenda, you have things that you need to get through, and you're very wedded to getting that done. And it takes a lot of experience and a lot of different opportunities for you to kind of move out of the instructing and informing and really pivoting into that consultation, the advising, the facilitating that comes in. For me too, I have been teaching a class and I give an example, like pull something out of my toolkit of like an example. And that example then sparks a whole nother level. It's like, whoa, wait a minute. And then it's like the whole conversation wants to shift. And now they want to talk about that because I've now shared something that they weren't thinking about. And so having to be present to that and okay, I'm going to give up what I was expecting to go through. We're still going to get there, but it might not be in the same exact things. You're not going to do the exact same lessons. And I think that is a really unique kind of skill set that not everybody knows to possess, or that even sees that as a career trajectory for somebody that is in public speaking. It's also, I think, the difference between keynoting and doing workshops. There are some people that are great keynote speakers that aren't great doing workshops because they actually aren't really interested in the dialogue. They just want to share their message and thank you, I'm out. I hope that helped you, right? And those can be great too. Anyway, but you had another example that you were going to share that you said was a little less severe.
Yes. So I identified 3 kinds of conflict. And I think that's the essence of where I was going with the second example, because we know Patrick Lencioni and the 5 dysfunctions of a team talks about, I do too, big fan. It talks about vulnerability-based trust. And right after that, he talks about productive conflict. And so you would ask, what happens when there's conflict? It's really calling the process. It's normalizing conflict and helping people understand this is such a good thing. We have conflict. Yes. And so a lot of times I'll just say to teams, this is amazingly great. And they're thinking, oh no, because we have so many people who are conflict adverse sitting at the table going, they're starting to back up. They're starting to get uncomfortable. Their eyes are getting a little bigger. They're thinking, oh, no. I don't want to go there. And so just to flip that and say, this is fantastic, team. This is exactly what we're going for. This is conflict. and then working through productive conflict and how to engage with one another in that way is really, really beneficial.
Yeah.
So that's the other way I flipped it. Yay, go productive conflict.
Yeah, I know for myself, like I've had to get really comfortable with sitting in a room and being uncomfortable with other people. Because even sometimes for me, like other people being uncomfortable makes me so uncomfortable. And as the servant heart that I have, I want to help and I'm very empathetic and I want to make it better all the time. And I've had to really learn about letting silence have a seat with what we're talking about and not feeling like I need to advocate for somebody else to
Mhm.
talk. Sometimes we need to help, but if you're always that person that's, I think, I think what we mean to say is no, 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 no. Like invite
Mhm.
someone. Pamela, did you have something you wanted to say? Versus, I think what Pamela meant was, all of that conflict can be so hard. I want to talk a little bit too, because in your background, besides being like a wonderful coach, Hudgens, you also work with scaling up, which is near and dear to our hearts at Threefold. So as a scaling up coach, like first of all, made you decide to become certified? And then how have you seen that certification benefit organizations? Like how have you seen that model benefit organizations?
My pathway to scaling up came following my work for 13 years as a CEO. And when I transitioned away from that, I wasn't exactly sure where I wanted to go. And I had a friend and colleague who had a coaching business and too many clients and invited me to do some coaching just to help during that season, which was perfect. I had time to think about it. And so it was there I realized I love coaching. And so that really kind of lit that fire. And at the same time, someone who is also near and dear to Threefold, Dr. Craig Overmeyer,
Love Dr. O.
said, I'm going to this Scaling Up Summit. And he was certified. And he said, do you want to go? And I said, well, Craig, I'm a real spreadsheet kind of person. And I said, I have this Excel spreadsheet that has everything I'm looking for in my next opportunity.
Oh my gosh.
And if you know Craig, that's going to blow his mind.
Yeah, really? Wow, I can just see him. Pamela, that's amazing that you thought about that.
He thought that was pretty amazing. Because not only did I want to coach in a way that was meaningful, that impacted the lives of leaders, their companies, their employees, and the community, not only did I want that, I myself wanted to be part of a community where I could be a servant leader and be in a community of abundance and lifelong learning. And so I went to the Scaling Up Summit as a guest, and I was just checking box after box. I mean, I think that within the first day, I probably had 80% of those boxes checked on my spreadsheet. And all the pieces fit together. And I've often said, my life always makes more sense to me through my rearview mirror than through my windshield. There was part of me that was like, wow, this is a big undertaking. You have to apply and you get vetted and you have to do all sorts of training and testing to become certified. So it's a large, significant commitment. And when I looked at it this way, I was thinking, okay, is this the way to go or not? And when I looked at it through my rearview mirror, I thought everything leads up to this. It's almost, of course, this is what I would do next.
Yeah.
And so that was really the push that got me going with scaling up. You asked how it's impactful in people's lives. One of the things that I really love about scaling up, one is it's growth focused and it's big growth focused, 10x
Yes.
growth focused, if that's the kind of growth that you want. And every leader, owner, CEO, and their executive team defines what growth looks like for them. And I love that. But it's okay to have a big appetite for growth in scaling up. It is designed to grow at the rhythm and pace that you are ready to grow in terms of your company and your people. Scaling up looks at 4 different decision areas: people, strategy, which really is strategic thinking, deep
Yeah.
strategic thinking, execution planning, and cash, which is the oxygen of any business. And we get to knit those things together in a way that influences culture. And there's nothing better than when our clients make best places to work lists or get the endorsement of their employees or have significant retention rates in their employees, because it tells us that they're hiring A players, that the culture is building and growing. And the one other thing I would say in this little summary of what I love about scaling up is it's one thing to grow your business. You know, if we think about the business is growing, the issue is the people are who run the business. And so it's almost like those two are inextricably intertwined. And if we think about or imagine a rubber band between them, if we start growing the company and we're not growing the people, the tension between the company and the people stretches and stretches and stretches. And eventually it's going to snap or break, worse yet. And that's culture, right? And so scaling up is an opportunity to look at where the company is going to go in relation to how to grow the people so that they grow with the company. The leaders grow with the company. The managers grow with the company. And it all rises up, up, up. And I think that's the definition of impact in scaling up is when we grow people and their lives get better at work, in the community and at home because they're growing as individuals along with the opportunities of their company growing. And those two rise together.
I love that imagery with the rubber band. That's so good. With the organizations that you've worked with and those 4 areas, do you find that one of those 4 areas is harder for teams to grasp? People, strategy, execution, cash, or does it vary?
What people struggle with certainly varies. I think, though, in the process of scaling up, probably the biggest challenge is strategic thinking because it's deeper and it's more tedious and it takes longer. It's just a bigger investment to really get a strategy that helps you know your place in the market and where you are going to differentiate yourself as a company in a unique and differentiated space, right? Unique and valuable and differentiated is the definition of strategy. There are ways that we work through that, but there really aren't great shortcuts through that process. It's also probably the most exhilarating space. What you put into is probably proportionate to what you get out. And the discoveries and new understandings, even in companies that have been around for 40, 45 years, the new discoveries that come from really doing that deep strategy work is amazing. And it helps pave the way. With that being said, Gretchen, I will say that if I were to ask a lot of clients these days, they're struggling in the people space.
Really?
And yeah. Just so many things that are going on in this world, even just multi-generational workplaces and how to speak the language of 4 different generations and how to make sure we're not losing any of them along the way. And building that culture together, among other kinds of factors, can be really challenging. Thinking about leadership at every level of a company helps level set some of that. But that can be a challenge too.
Sure. What have you done with, and maybe I'm overstretching here, but I imagine as you're working with a team through kind of a scaling up model and methodology, that when you're in the room, maybe you have a leader or 2 that just aren't quite there, meaning they don't have perhaps the emotional intelligence or even the experience and wisdom to honestly contribute to the conversation in a meaningful way. And to a point where they might even become distracting because they're just not, like, if you're trying to talk about strategy and they're just really focusing on the tactics, like they can't think beyond the end of the year, right? Or they can't think beyond what they know in their own experience. I imagine that causes some conflict. And so how do you guide executives and probably, I would imagine, CEOs? Hopefully it's not the CEO or the president that you're talking to that is that person that's struggling, but do you coach them to scale that person up, or do you make decisions to kind of change the way in which you talk about those things and kind of sideline those people that it just can't understand the strategy piece, that are so focused on the tactics? Or with the people side, someone that's like, well, I did it this way and they should just, buck it up, or they just want everything, whatever those biases they might be carrying into that. How do you manage those kind of conflicts?
That's a great question. And that does happen quite a bit, I
Yeah.
think. And so I start with A players and really helping executives, executive teams, CEOs, and then cascading out from there, understand what an A player is. Oftentimes, while companies may not use that language, they may think that their best team players are those who are most productive.
Yes.
And not realize that there's a whole nother side to the A player coin. One side is knowing my job, being a highly capable, producing individual, right? But part of being a highly capable individual is also being highly aligned and living the core values of that company.
Right.
And so let's assume for this discussion that those core values are defined and described and known across the company. What we're looking at is, in that person that you just mentioned, are they a producer but not values driven? Are they values driven but not a producer? And if so, do they know clearly the expectations that are in place for their particular role? And are those expectations framed up in both areas? A lot of job descriptions just say, this is the work you're going to do.
Yes.
And other duties to be assigned, and don't necessarily include aligning with the core purpose of the company and demonstrating or living the core values, keeping those alive within the company. And so I recommend looking at that quarterly, at least biannually, across the company. And we define that we can make some of those definitions very customized to the company, so it's in their language, but it's essentially looking at what's the core value alignment of the person, what's the productivity of the person, and then depending on, are they an A player? Are they an AB player? That's like an emerging leader. So we want to do just as much there as we would want to with someone we might be concerned about. Are they a B player, C, et cetera? And then depending on that, if they're low on core values, but a high producer, then we go to core values coaching. First and foremost with their manager. Let's not assume that they know. Let's give them the opportunity to learn and then see what they do with that. Oftentimes, if a person just doesn't really feel the core values of the company, it'll come out in core value coaching and they'll make a decision. They might go a different direction. So there's core value coaching, but let's say they're very well aligned with core values. They're just not producing yet. Well, then we probably need to do some skills training.
Right.
And really help them, do they have the tools and resources and knowledge and skills that they need in order to produce? And so over that quarter, we make sure that they get that kind of mentoring or skills training that they need, and then reassess. And a lot of times, Gretchen, people will move. They'll move up at least to a B player, and then you'll start to see them moving across in that productivity as they get better and more comfortable or confident in their job. But if not, if they're resistant to that, there's a plan in place, because another option is a performance plan, right? And I always encourage people, don't drag that out. You've got to be able to hire slowly and term quickly if the writing's on the wall. So it's not that we don't want to give people ample opportunity, and they do have opportunity through that kind of A player framework that I just described. But if it's just not working for them, keeping someone around too long is going to chase your A players right out the door, because the biggest reason they leave is they don't want to work with people who have that type of very, very negative impact within the company.
I talk a lot about engagement, and you kind of speak into this core values alignment. Whereas if someone is highly producing and they're not aligned with your core values, they really become opportunistic, right? I would define that as they're very satisfied, but they're not loyal, right? And so the challenge with
Right.
having someone who's super satisfied is that they're always looking like, well, this is great until they want to offer me a little bit more money, or they're going to, do this for me. And so you don't actually get that engagement that comes from both loyal and satisfied. And this idea of someone who's really aligned by your core values, but isn't producing, then I think, you're looking like, are they coachable? Are they humble? Are they motivated? Are they like unaffiliated with what they're doing? Or are they just an allegiant person? Like they have this strong loyalty and they're not actually interested in growing, but they just love the company and they love doing things the way that we used to do them, in which case we need them to actually be a little humbled and recognize like there's some skill here,
Yeah.
because having someone who's super loyal and not satisfied also works against your business, right? Like you don't want those people either. You want people who are both loyal and satisfied, which I think leads to engagement. So,
And if I can give one quick example, this just happened last week. I was coaching an executive who was noticing that there was a very new employee. And by the time we sorted through what was going on, she was core values aligned, but she wasn't producing. And by the time we sorted through what was going on, what was evident is this was her first career job. She was treating it like an hourly job, like she had taken on during college when you just show
up and get it done. Yeah.
Minimum of what you need to do. And so not making assumptions either about what might be driving it for people. And so I'm really excited this week. I'll find out, but the manager was going to go back and talk to this person about the difference between a job and a career and how this could potentially fit into their career. And it might turn out that it just doesn't. But it was really interesting that all the behaviors, like the light bulb moment was, she just doesn't know what a career is or how to engage in a career.
Oh, so good. This has been so great. Pamela, if people want to get connected with you and follow up, maybe they're looking for you to be their coach or they want you to come and talk to them about scaling up, what's the best way for people to connect with you?
By email is great. Pamela, P as in Paul, AMELA at Markay, all one word, MARKAY advisors.com. And Gretchen, thank you so much for this opportunity. This conversation has been delightful.
Yay, I'm so glad. Oh my goodness. How great was that conversation about A players? I love that. I loved the metaphors she talked about with culture and rubber bands, but I love what she said about identifying your A players and if they're producers or if their core values aligned or if they're both. I think that's a great question we need to ask ourselves as leaders. How are you showing up in your business? Would you define yourself as someone that is core values aligned and producing? Would you define yourself as someone who's really producing, but you're not really sure you know what the core values are of your company? Are you someone that knows your core values, but now you're starting to question if you're actually producing? All these are great questions. I love that so much. And I'd love to hear what you took away from this conversation. Did you know that we're on YouTube? Well, we are. And if you're interested in watching this episode versus just listening to it, you can check out who my guest is. You can go out to YouTube, subscribe to our channel, go to www.youtube.com/@madeForImpact and subscribe to the show, share, like, and follow it, and let us know what you think. But most of all, I want you to remember that you are made for impact.